Greetings once again. I am Dave Thomas, and this time I am building the Alarm scale model rocket kit from Rocketarium. This is a relatively detailed kit, and so this is not what you want to use for your first model. Have a few models built and under your belt before trying this one. Okay, we'll go ahead and open this up. Alright, and as usual, we'll want to check and make sure we have everything. So, opening up the instruction book here, we've got our parachute hiding amongst the leaves. Alright, and then we also have water slide decals as well as some vinyl decals here, so don't lose those. Alright, let's find the main part list. Here we go. Okay. So we've got the decals, the vinyl strips, the parachute. Okay, then we've got two body tubes, and those are going to have parts inside. So we have a longer body tube there. This is what they're calling the main channel. Okay, we've got a smaller body tube, and this contains the nose cone and the tail cone. Alright, we have a motor mount kit, all self-contained, ejection baffle kit. I always love these things. It's probably one of the best things about Rocketarium kits. Those baffles work great. Okay, this is clay for a nose weight. Do not skip this step. If the fins on this are so far forward that without that nose weight it's going to be dreadfully unstable. And then in the paper bag here, this should have more fins in it. Okay, so we've got a shock cord, launch lugs, and detail trim pieces. Okay, we have 4 forward fins. Alright, the 4 aft fins, and an applicator. Alright, so let's come back and make sure we've got everything. And it looks like we do. Okay, I'm going to clear this away and we will get started. Now, normally we would start this kit by building the engine mount, but I want to talk about the fins and the other balsa parts here for just a moment. If you are planning to add sanding sealer to the fins, I would go ahead and start the fin process now, and then while the sanding sealer is drying, you can go back and do the engine mount and those parts that don't require fins yet. Otherwise, you're going to have a gap during your building time waiting for your sanding sealer to dry. Now, if you're not going to use a sanding sealer and you're just going to sand the fins here, or even not sand the fins, but I would recommend sanding the fins, then go ahead and skip ahead to the motor mount part, and then you'll just mount the fins however you want to. Okay, so for all of these, the first thing I'm going to do is sand them, and I'm going to use some 150 grit sandpaper. Move this out of the way for a moment. Okay, and just sand with the grain on all of these. Okay, so you get the idea here. I'm not going to shape any of the fins quite yet. I want to at least give them one coat of sanding sealer before I start shaping them. But do the same thing here with both sets of fins. So sand the faces here on each one of those, and then Once that's done, we'll actually add the sanding sealer. So I'm going to do the rest of my sanding off camera because it's really boring to watch, and then come back. What I've done here is inserted a thin straight pin into the edge of each fin here, okay, like this, and then also for the main channel, it's got its own pin in here. And the purpose of the pins is twofold. One is it's going to allow me to hold on to the piece while I'm adding the sanding sealer, and then I can put this into a piece of corrugated cardboard to allow it to dry like that. Alright, I am using a polyurethane based sanding sealer here. You can use putty based ones as well. It's up to personal preference. And you can use a brush. I'm just going to use a cotton applicator here. Alright, try and keep it off of the root edge. Although if you get some on there, it's not the end of the world. It just means you need to sand a little bit more. But we want to leave our root edge porous so that it accepts glue better. And do make sure you've got something covering your work surface, because this stuff is kind of permanent. You can go ahead and get the other edges, the non-root edges here. Okay, so there's one fin. I'm just going to put that right in there. Okay, I'm going to do this basically the same thing for all of the rest of the fins. And then once this dries, I'm going to sand it back down to remove any bumps and such, and then give it at least one more coat. So you want to have at least 2 coats of sanding sealer on here with sanding in between. I'm going to do the rest of these though off camera, and I'll come back when they're all done. I have my fins done with their first coat of sanding sealer, and they're drying right now. This is the main channel, and for this one you only want to seal one surface. The other surface will be glued to the body tube, and so we want to leave it unsealed. The sanding sealer on my fins is drying, and so now we'll come back to the first part of the instructions, which is to put the motor mount together. So this comes in its own little bag here. Alright, we should have 2 plywood centering rings, a motor mount tube, and it may have a spacer inside of it. There should be a spacer somewhere. Okay, mid-power engine clip, D to E adapter there, and then we've got a sleeve and an engine block. Alright, we're going to have to do a little bit of marking. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is put a little bit of glue, about 3/4 of an inch down inside one end of the motor mount tube. Okay, and then we're going to take our engine block here and put that in the opposite end, followed by our spacer, and then just push this down till it's flush. And as you can see there, it's going to push the glue forward. I've actually got a lot of glue in there. I'm going to smooth that into a fillet here so it doesn't just drip down into my motor mount tube there. Alright, and then go ahead and pull that out right away so that you don't accidentally glue that into the motor mount tube. Okay, then we're going to put on some marks here. So first of all, we need a mark at 25 millimeters from the aft end. It's going Be right here. And you want to extend these out a bit. If you, what tends to happen is you get them all lined up, and then you put your engine clip on there, and it hides all the lines. Okay, then we need another one at 95 millimeters up here. Okay, and now we're going to cut a slit there, and if we've got this measurement correct, this is going to be right above our engine block, and it's right there in the glue. That's fine. Okay, and then we're going to put this in. So just the 90-degree part of the engine clip there, and that's going to slide down into here. All right, then this is our locking ring, and that is going to end up at that 25 millimeter mark we made. Okay, and so once I've got it there, I'm going to move it down a little farther and then put a bead of glue around the forward edge here. Go ahead and smooth that around. Alright, and then I'm going to move that back until I get to my mark there again. Okay, and then go ahead and smooth that around again. This does not actually take a lot of shear force. It's just there to keep the clip in place, so you really don't need to worry about fillets and stuff on that part. Okay, now we have two rings here, alright, and one has this down written on it, and that one, okay, we've got to make sure we got everything together here. Okay, this one is going to go on first and face downward. And here we're just going to dry fit everything together. Okay, and then we're going to take our tail cone Okay, so this is going to go in so that the engine clip comes out here. Okay, and then the motor mount tube itself should sit right against the edge there. And then this ring, the one that says down, and the down is facing down now, that should go right up against the plastic there. And again, I haven't glued anything. We'll come back to that in a minute. Okay, and then the other ring here can face in either direction. And that is going to fit just over the forward end of the clip there. So you'll be able to just see the clip when all this is in the right place. Alright, so that's all fitting together. Now what I'm going to do is pull this back up a little bit and pull that out. Okay, so we need some glue right on the inside here. And for that, let's see, it's actually going to be cleanest to put this glue onto the tube first and push it down rather than putting it here, which is going to have a tendency to get it stuck up inside there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just make a bead of glue here right around the aft edge. Alright, I'm going to try not to get it on the clip there. And then this is going to go in here. Alright, realign it there. And I can feel it as it went in there. That made a good bond between the ridges inside there and the tube. So that's what I'm looking for. Okay, now I'm going to pull this up. Okay, and we need some glue around the motor mount and around this lip. So to do that one, I'm going to use an applicator. One applicator does come with the kit, so you can use that one. I just keep a supply of them on hand. So I need a ring of glue right where the centering ring is going to come down on the motor mount. Oops, come back here. You can actually put it above it a little bit. Okay, and then we're also going to put some glue on this lip, right around like that. Okay, I'm going to push that down. Okay, and then clean off any glue that gets on the outside there. And if you want, you can go ahead and put in a fillet of glue right around the motor mount there. At this point, it doesn't matter if you get any on the engine clip, because that part of the clip is not going to move. Alright, and then we just need another ring of glue up here, right above where that centering ring is going to end up resting. Okay, and then put the centering ring on. Again, we're going to bring that just so we can see the clip there. Okay, there's the clip. And once again here, if you want, you can go ahead and put in a fillet around that. Okay. And use my fingers to do some final smoothing there. Also make sure we get it close to perpendicular. And then the same thing down here. Alright, and then I'm just going to set that aside to dry completely before we go on to the next part. Okay, next on our list of things to do is to assemble the ejection baffle. And this comes in its own package as well, and it has its own instructions. So we'll set aside the main instructions there. Okay, so inside we've got a coupler and 2 baffle plates and a screw eye. It's a nice screw eye there. Okay, so first of all, go ahead and take the screw eye and thread it into the baffle plate that has the hole in the middle. Okay, and then once you get that all the way through, go ahead and back it out again. And I think I'm actually going to want this side to the outside. Doesn't make a whole lot of difference. Oop. Alright, and we'll go ahead here and just put a little spot of glue on there. And I'm going to thread this back through just until before I run out of thread. So I want to see just a little bit of threads exposed on the eyelet side. If you go all the way down to where there's no more threads, you'll lose the lock. Okay, and then on the other side here, I'm just going to run a bead of glue around the threads to just lock that well in place. Okay, set that aside for just a minute. Alright, and then we're going to take a bead of glue here. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to dry fit this. Alright, so it came out of this in the package, so it should fit. Better safe to make sure. Alright, so here I'm going to put in a bead of glue right along the edge. Kind of smooth that around. We don't want any on the outside. Okay, and then I'm going to pop this in. Just like that. Okay, and this plate can be pretty flush. You really don't do anything else with it. Okay, with the other plate, we're going to do the same type of thing here. It's a bit much. It's alright. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this one in at a little bit of an angle like this. Alright, and then kind of pull it back, and that's going to bring up glue on at least half of it here. And I'm just going to smear that around, and then I'm going to pull this forward. I want just a millimeter or two of a lip there above the baffle plate. Okay, and then you can go through, if there's glue down inside the holes there, just take a bit of a paper towel, or I'm just going to use the handle part of this applicator and just clear the glue out of there so it doesn't block the airflow. Okay, and then this can be set aside to dry as well. Okay, for our next task, we're going to mark the airframe with the fin and launch lug lines. And so here we need to come back to this page, and this has got our fin marking guide on it. So here, just cut this out with scissors or your hobby knife. Now I'm going to make sure here, when I cut this, I'm going to end up cutting through my decal guide back here. So I'm actually going to go make a photocopy of this and cut out the photocopy because I do need the information back here. This is a photocopy now, and I can cut it out with impunity and not worry about destroying something on the back of it. Okay, and I'm just going to wrap this around one end of the longer body tube first of all, and just line up those tick marks. Okay, and I'm just going to put some masking tape on here, and I'm going to go ahead and let it go off the end there to keep this from rotating on me. Okay, and so any of these that are unmarked are just fins. Alright, now where it says channel here, the main channel piece is going to go between these lines. Alright, so I'm going to write on here, this will be where the channel goes. Alright, then we've got a launch lug line here. I'm just going to write on here, lug. Okay. And then we're going to do the same thing for the smaller tube, except that the small tube will not have a launch lug line. So again, I'm going to write on here, this is channel. Okay, and no launch lug line, though I do need this other fin line here. Alright. Now we need to extend the lines all the way down the tubes. I'm going to use this tube marking guide by Estes. If you don't have this, you can use a door frame or a drawer edge. Missed one in there. Alright, so I'm going to go back to my guide here. And yep, I did. Okay, so I should have one more fin line right there. Alright, that was easily fixed. But I just noticed I had a big space between my launch lug line and the next fin line. There we go. Okay, so those are all marked. And coming back to our instructions, our next job is to load the nose weight into the nose cone. Okay, do not skip this step. If you're going to use some other type of nose weight other than clay, some people like to use BBs and epoxy or things like that. That's fine, but make sure you've got the required weight. Let's see if it says on here. 70 grams. Okay. So to do this, we're just going to break it up into small chunks here. And you can either turn them into little pellets or little worms. Alright, and then we're just going to, they need to be small enough that we can stuff them down through the nose there. Okay, and then you can use a pencil. I like to use the handle of my hobby knife here. But just something that's going to be stiff, and just start stuffing that all the way up into the nose as far as you can get it to go. Okay, so when you reach the end of your clay there, try and get it as far forward as possible, and also with as few air gaps as possible, because the farther we can get that nose weight forward, the more stable the rocket's going to be. Okay, so that looks and feels pretty good. You'll probably want to take a little bit of rubbing alcohol and clean this off to get the clay residue off. And I'm going to go do the same thing with my hands here. The glue on my motor mount is still a bit wet, although it's dry enough now we can handle it without it flowing. Okay, now first I'm going to dry fit this into the aft end of the main body tube, so this should be able to fit in without hanging up on anything here. Okay, so it's going to look like that. Personally, I like to have my engine clip on the same side as my launch lug, so it kind of stays out of the way during launch. Okay, and so what they recommend is taking the applicator that came with the kit, and you're going to make a ring of glue 2 inches or 51 millimeters from the aft end. So you're actually going to measure out here. Alright, so 5.1 centimeters, give or take, about there. Alright, dip this into your glue, stick it up through the middle until you hit your fingernail there, your thumbnail there, and then rotate that around. Okay, now they also then have us putting glue in the little grooves here, and then also right on the inside of the aft end, and the idea is that you're going to push all this stuff through all of that glue. Okay, I have one problem with that, is that when you do it that way, this glue here that we put on the end is all just going to get pushed forward into the other ring of glue that we've got up there. So I'm going to do this just a slightly different way. You can do it their way if you want. Okay. But here, go ahead and get your glue ready. And I will, most of this I'm going to do exactly the way they show in the instructions. So once again, I'm going to take my ruler, find my 5.1 centimeter mark there. Wow! And make a big mess with my glue. Alright, well, we'll clean that up in a moment. Alright, so I'm going to stick this up, run it around the inside. I'm actually going to use a little more here since we have the extra. Okay, and then I'm going to run this around in the grooves. Now you don't want this too thick, you mainly just want it in the grooves there. Otherwise you're going to have a great big glob trying to ooze out at the other end. So I'm going to spread that around. I might even see if I can kind of squeegee part of that off. Right, we're not going to have any shortage of glue here. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and partially insert this just so that the forward centering ring just clears the tube itself, the opening. Now I'm going to put glue right around the edge where they wanted us to do it to begin with, but I'm doing so in a way that I don't get it on that forward ring, so that now the glue will be available to the aft ring where it needs to be. Okay, now I'm going to rotate this around so I'm on my launch lug line. Alright, now I'm just going to push it forward. Okay, and then quickly wipe off any glue that's left there. Okay, I'm going to hold that down so that as much as possible the glue fills in the seam there. Right, so I'm going to keep some pressure on this for about 60 seconds. Then I'm going to clean up that mess of glue. Next, we're going to insert the ejection baffle into the main body tube. And here again we need to make a measurement to find the halfway point here. Alright, so this is 51 millimeters. So we'll call it 2.5 is close enough to our halfway point. Alright, and then we're going to add a bead of glue inside the main body tube here on its forward end, right inside the edge there. Okay. And we're just going to slide this in, give it a little twist as we go, to distribute the glue. Okay, and then I'm just going to let that dry for a few minutes before we attach the shock cord. Now that the ejection baffle glue is dry here, we can go ahead and attach the shock cord. And this is in the same little parts package that has the launch lugs and the trim pieces. So here we're just going to tie a double knot into the eyelet. Like that. And we're going to pull on it from every direction we can think of here. Alright, and then cut this back a little bit, just so there's no chance of it getting in between the coupler and the tube. And then as a little added safety measure, we'll just put a little dab of glue on that knot. You can use white glue or wood glue for this, and it doesn't take much, just a little drop there. Kind of work that in. Okay. Now we're going to put this up through the smaller body tube. Okay, so here what we want to do is glue this on without gluing the shock cord to the inside of the tube. And for this, I'm going to use some white glue. Now normally we would put glue up inside the tube rather than on the coupler. But in this case, I don't want to get glue on the shock cord, and I also actually want to put some glue that'll get forced into the seam that's going to occur between these two tubes and help make a smoother finish there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead here and run some white glue. Alright, don't want it too heavy as we don't want a lot of excess oozing going on here. Okay, now the other thing I'm going to need to do is line up my fin alignment guides here. I'm going to line it with the channel guide. Alright, so as we hit the glue here, I'm going to rotate this back and forth. Alright, and then I'm going to line up my channel lines, and everything else should line up as well. Okay, and now I'm going to take this glue and first of all just kind of run it around, get it in that seam. And then I'll wipe off the excess. Okay, and now reposition this again. And I'm going to hold this for about 60 seconds so that the glue can actually grab there and not force the tubes apart. While I'm waiting for my sanding sealer to finish drying on my fins, I'm working on the nose cone here, which is 3D printed. And in this case, I want to knock down the printing stripes there. So I'm starting here with 100 grit sandpaper and kind of working my way around. I've already given it one pass already. And now I'm going to move to some finer sandpaper here. So here's some 150. I'm just going to wipe that down with a little bit of alcohol here. Alright, so that's taken down a lot of the ridges from the 3D printing. And what I'll do next is prime this with a filling sandable primer, and that should fill in the rest of the 3D printing stripes and such in there. Now, for some things I actually like the 3D printing. So for the tail cone here, I'm going to leave this alone because it gives it kind of a machined metal look. And the seam here isn't as noticeable as the one on the nose cone was. Okay, so I'm going to take this off camera and prime it and then finish up doing the sanding sealer on the fins, and then we should be able to start attaching fins. Here's my nose cone after 2 coats of filling primer and then being resanded. And you can see it's considerably smoother now than the original 3D printed part was. You can still see a little bit of a seam there. So I'm going to give this at least 1 more coat, probably 2 of the primer, and then sand that again, and then this will be ready to paint. Okay, now let's go back to our fins. My sanding sealer has dried on everything here, and I've resanded the faces. Now for the fins you have 2 options. If you want the full detailed scale effect, then what you're going to need to do is taper the fins using this guide. Okay, so you taper the leading edge here of the aft fin. The main fins, you taper the leading edge and the trailing edge back here. Okay, the forwardmost fins are really thin and delicate, and they don't suggest doing anything to them as far as shaping. Now the drawback to tapers though is it will make your fins more fragile, especially if it lands on an edge. And so the other option is to do the sport scale model here, and in that case all we'll do is round the leading edges and leave the other edges square. Okay, so I'm going to do that. I really hate breaking fins. So this is our main channel, and again in the instructions it shows putting this on before the fins, but I'm going to use a fin alignment guide to help keep all my fins straight. So if you're going to do that, this needs to go on after the fins. Alright, for the rounding here, I'm just going to start with some 100 grit sandpaper, and the first thing I'll do is just knock down the edge here as we go. So we'll just give it a few strokes. Okay, and this is just going to start the rounding process. Okay, so now I don't have the sharp corner edge there anymore. And now all I need to do is continue this and just kind of roll my wrist a little bit here. And then switch sides. Okay, and then we'll want to periodically check this in cross section to make sure it is rounding off evenly. We don't want it to be more rounded on one side or the other. And so now it's just a matter of continuing this until we have the full rounded effect there. Now once I've got the shape in, I'm going to switch to 150 grit sandpaper and just give that a few strokes here to make it smoother. Depending on how porous your balsa is, you might want to go up to a 220 grit as well. Okay, and then all we have to do is just square off the other edges here. And they should be mostly square, but this is also to make sure that I don't have any sanding sealer left on the root edge here. Okay, and then just a couple of strokes on the trailing edge. Okay, and we've got a little bit of a tip edge there. You can just give that a few strokes as well. Okay, so that's one of 4 main fins. Okay, here we've got one of the aft fins. We're going to do the same thing here. So we'll start by rounding this over. Alright, and then as I said, the forwardmost fins are really tiny and delicate. You might want to sand the surfaces of them, but don't try and sand an airfoil into them. They're probably going to snap on you that way. Alright, so I'm going to go off camera and do the remainder of the fins and then come back. I have the fins sanded and rounded. And before we start putting them on, first thing we need to do is mark the main fins. And so it's showing to put a little mark there at 1.5 inches or 38 millimeters from the aft end. And this will help us position some of the detail pieces a bit. Okay, so I'm just going to line that up. Okay, and 38 millimeters is there. And you want to do both sides of each fin. I'm just going to do each one on the first side, and then we'll go to the others. Alright, those are all marked, and we're also going to need to mark the body tube. Alright, so we're going to mark the fin lines at 1 3/4 or 45 millimeters from the aft end of the tube, not the entire rocket here. Okay, so 45 is going to be right there. And we'll need to do that for each of the fin lines. Okay, and then on each of the same lines, we need a mark at 5.5 inches or 140 millimeters. That will be for the main fins. then from the forward end, we need 2.5 inches from the forward end, or 64 millimeters. And then while we're doing all of this marking, let's go ahead and put on the launch lug. We won't put them on, but we'll mark where they go. Okay, so we want it at 32 millimeters. Or 1.25 inches. And then the forward one will be at 12 inches, or 30.5. Okay, so that should be all of our tube marks. Okay, and for our channel, we also need a line at 3.25 inches, or 83 millimeters from the aft end. I'm going to go ahead and do this on both of the channel lines there. Okay, and then I almost forgot one step here. For the channel itself, we need to round over the edges, kind of taper those down so that they will meet the body tube looking like this. So this is the cross section showing it from the side. Okay. So we'll just have to round these over, and I'm going to do that off camera and come back just because you've seen enough sanding already. Alright, so after sanding, now we've got this taper on each end of the channel. Alright, we'll go ahead and set that aside for now.